So good afternoon. I got it. That's a very descriptive and lengthy introduction, so now you know all about me. And thank you to Mark and the Institute for Cultural Diplomacy for the invitation to be here today. And I'm sure most of you, if you've been here all day, are getting tired. It's the end of the afternoon, so I'm still going to hopefully keep you engaged. So as Mark mentioned, I'm the executive director for the Municipal Art Society, which is a 120-year-old urban design non-governmental organization, a nonprofit located here in New York City. And so what I'm going to talk about today is how the work of my organization helps to enable arts and culture, specifically by advocating for the public spaces where arts and culture can happen. And I just want to say in my previous job, a position which Mark mentioned, as Chief of Staff for I worked for the City of New York in the Department of Transportation. We were the great recipients of some cultural diplomacy from Denmark. We had the great privilege of working with Jan Gell, who's a terrific architect and planner, who came over from Denmark to help us do planning here in New York City. And most recently, we've been working with Henk Ovink, who is another, I believe he works for the Danish government and is on loan to the federal government here in the United States to help us with some sustainability projects. So we've we've certainly benefited from some cultural diplomacy here. So MAS was established in 1893 by a band of painters, sculptors, artists, architects, and urban planners who sought to provide public spaces and buildings with decoration, ornamentation, and monuments. This is a photo of the monument to Richard Hunt, who was one of the founders of MAS, and he was an architect as well, which is in Central Park, which dates from 1898. Let me just leave that for a second. The intent was to bring arts and culture directly to the public in informal venues, as opposed to arts and culture tucked away in more formal venues, such as private homes, museums, and libraries. The first motto of the organization was, "To make us love our city, we must make our city lovely." And I'll just say, I'm going to be talking primarily about the arts and culture within New York City, arts in its most diverse sense, which includes all of the design arts and the visual arts, performing arts, and then diversity in the sense not so much that we use it as the description of different cultures, although that's part of it, but diversity in the sense of the range of the types of projects and work that you might find. So this dichotomy between formal and informal venues for arts and culture still resonates today. Cities all have their formal venues, such as museums, theaters, and opera halls, which you see here. And more importantly to the work that I'm involved in, cities have their informal venues for arts and culture, such as parks, subways, and the sidewalk. So as I mentioned before, MAS was founded in let me go back for a second. Today, these informal venues are feeling the pressure of increasing urbanization, and more people are choosing to live in cities worldwide. Many of these cities are already built up and are oversubscribed and struggle to meet the needs of their new residents. By 2050, as I'm sure many of you know, 7 out of every 10 people will live in an urban area. And we need to ensure that these informal venues are serving the public well as our cities become more dense and more populated. So groups like MAS, my organization, are important to maintaining some of these public spaces. Throughout its 120-year history, MAS has worked to ensure that these informal public venues are afforded their rightful place within the larger urban environment. We believe that these venues can serve as forums for people to gather and express themselves in social, cultural, and artistic ways, and that these activities contribute to and improve the quality of everyday life in the city. And I'd like to describe some of that history and some of the ongoing work that we're doing at MAS. As I mentioned before, the organization was founded in 1893 to enhance the cityscape with public monuments and murals. This is a drawing of New York City at the turn of the last century, the beginning of the 20th century. Soon, MAS's founders realized that the efforts were being subsumed as more building and development took place, and many of the buildings that grew out of this period were built without consideration or concern for surrounding neighborhoods and buildings, much less for public monuments and murals. So we've acted to protect these urban spaces, which contributed to the overall culture and quality of New York City's built spatial city. So the result was the city's first comprehensive building and zoning codes, which were enacted in 1916, which afforded the city adequate access to open space, air, and light, which helped to ensure citizens would still be able to congregate, interact, and express themselves in the public realm. So another important historic moment in New York City in terms of public space happened in the mid-20th century. During this time, many historic civic assets in New York City were being sacrificed without considering the consequences. Building structures that stood as inspiring monuments to city life, to urban civilization, and which the public could enjoy firsthand were lost. This is a picture of Penn Station, who I'm sure most of you in this room are way too young to remember, but it was demolished in the 60s. But this former Penn Station was built in 1910 and then demolished, as I said, in 1963. It was a wonderful structure and provided a glorious space to house trains and people. So currently, this is what Penn Station looks like, which some of you, I'm sorry if you've been there, but it is a necessary part of our urban infrastructure. It provides a frustrating experience to the unlucky many who must navigate its congested tunnels and passageways. And I will just mention that this was an above-ground structure. Most of this current Penn Station takes place below ground. So the destruction of the former Penn Station was an important turning point in the movement to preserve similarly meaningful structures. And this is a picture of Mayor Wagner from New York signing a bill in 1965 which led the way to reforming some of the way that permissions were granted to protect landmarks. So our organization led the way to pass legal reforms that would provide the tools necessary to prevent another Penn Station debacle, and more generally to preserve the character of civic assets and urban spaces throughout New York. By the way, those of you who will be around New York City next year is the 50th anniversary of the Landmarks Law, which is very exciting to those of us here, and we'll be celebrating that with some special events, which I think many cities in Europe, I know, and all around the world have similar concerns in terms of what you preserve in terms of your cultural and built assets and what you allow to be demolished. So I think it's an important concern for everyone. So today there are many benefits of the work that we did to preserve to institute the Landmarks Law. This is Grand Central Station was set to be undermined by a poorly designed tower, which you can see on the left. And the legal reforms I just mentioned prevented this from happening. They were further supported by an advocacy campaign, which was led by MAS, along with Jackie Kennedy Onassis, who worked with us, to ensure that reforms would stand up in court. And today, Grand Central Terminal is not merely a train station, but a social and cultural architectural asset to New York City. And not only does the structure in and of itself contribute to arts and culture through its architecture and design, but it also serves as an unexpected venue for arts and culture. In fact, Grand Central has become a programmable space, and it hosts special events and art exhibits throughout the year. So this is a place I hope you have visited since you've been in New York. More recently, my organization has intervened to ensure that a proposed rezoning of our central business district to provide additional office space does not undermine sites of historic and architectural merit. This is a picture of East Midtown, and I think you can actually see the UN there in the background where we are today. And we identified 17 buildings within the footprint of the proposed rezoning for landmark status after site visits, research, and collaboration with various experts in the fields of architecture, history, and urban design. One of the 17 buildings that was identified to be proposed as landmarks was the Center for Fiction, which operates a building dating back to 1820, where it served as the New York Mercantile Library, which is over near Grand Central Terminal. Today, the Center for Fiction offers a diverse program of free and low-cost public events featuring over 100 authors, translators, and critics each year. We've also been at the forefront of expanding preservation of significant architectural and cultural assets, and I think the most widely known of this is the expansion in Times Square. And this is a rendering of Times Square as it, with the closed spaces on Broadway, which are currently under construction. Times Square is not exactly an architectural gem, but it's a place that is an iconic symbol of New York City. The signs, the lights, the culture all resonate with people in a very real way. In the 80s, we took action to preserve the Times Square area by ensuring that all development must contribute to what makes it special, the lights. Times Square represents a great example of how public and shared spaces contribute to urban life, to urban diversity, by serving as places where people gather and express themselves. We also believe that cultural preservation of place matters, and sometimes culturally significant assets are much more local. We've partnered with an organization called City Lore, which is an oral history nonprofit which preserves historically and culturally significant places. Through a census of place, we surveyed New Yorkers and asked them to nominate places that evoke associations with history, memory, and tradition. What we heard back was that New Yorkers care about places like a graffiti mural, a legendary record store, or a historic tavern or bar where writers gather. And again, these efforts serve the purpose of promoting and providing the public with alternative avenues to arts and culture through informal, publicly accessible venues. These are the kinds of places that preserve meaning in our neighborhoods. All this work, as I mentioned before, began with a band of artists, sculptors, and painters who wanted to enrich the lives of New Yorkers by making their city beautiful. New York City today is full of monuments and murals, and some of these have deteriorated over time. We have a program called Adopt a Monument and Adopt a Mural. Whoops. And we raise money from private and corporate donors to bring back to life the city's most neglected installations of public art. For example, this is a photograph of the Heinrich Heine fountain on the Grand Concourse in the Bronx. This monument was first commissioned by a committee of German Americans in 1893. I think this was probably after the Statue of Liberty, one of the earliest examples of cultural diplomacy. It honors Heinrich Heine, the famous German poet, writer, and social dissonant. And it was originally intended to be installed in Grand Army Plaza just south of Central Park here in Manhattan. By the time it was finished, however, anti-German sentiment and political hand-wringing forced it to be relocated to the Bronx in 1899. MAS led the way for the restoration of the fountain in time for its 100th anniversary. At the rededication ceremony, the keynote speech was delivered by the deputy mayor of Dusseldorf. And if you get up to the Grand Concourse in the Bronx, it is an incredibly beautiful statue and lovely park, so I highly recommend. It's right near Yankee Stadium, so it's easy to find. This is a photograph of the rocket thrower by sculptor Donald DeLue. It was constructed for the New York World's Fair in 1964-65. The statue is a 43-foot-high bronze figure, the second tallest sculpture in New York City next to the Statue of Liberty. The theme of the monument was man conquering space, which was consistent with the overall future-oriented theme of the fair. As you can see, the figure here is seen hurling a rocket upwards, whoops, has its own mind here, The figure is hurling a rocket upwards with the right hand and reaching for a constellation of stars on the left. 50 years later, this statue still stands, thanks to conservation efforts that we've provided. And in fact, it's prominently featured during the US Open tennis tournament, which is situated in the same park. One more project that I just wanted to show you is a WPA Mural, which was the Works Progress Administration program, which was launched by the federal government during the Depression in the 30s. There was a Russian painter named Ilya Bolotowski who did the mural. It was located on Roosevelt Island, just east of the UN. In the East River. And the original setting of the mural was the waiting room of the Hospital for Chronic Diseases. The curved walls of the room, which you can see here, apparently left patients feeling rather anxious. And so to relieve their anxiety, the mural was commissioned, and it had geometric shapes and straight lines, which and with the colors was supposed to instill a feeling of openness and calmness. So the mural was hidden from public view under 7 coats of paint for many years, and was recently, it's being restored, and it will be reinstalled in the Cornell University campus as that's built, it will be built over the next few years on Roosevelt Island. So in conclusion, I hope the overview of the work has provided you some insight into how our organization enables arts and culture in the public realm. It contributes, we think, to the richness and diversity of our civic and cultural life here in New York City. So I hope you'll get around to take a look at these things, and hopefully this is helpful in terms of understanding more about our city. Thank you. And if there are any questions, I'd be happy to. You're talking about peace in terms of sort of relations between countries, and I'm trying to think if there are anything specifically. I mean, I think the fact that New York City has 52 million foreign visitors a year, well, they're not foreign, but some of them are. They come from countries all over the world, also from around the United States, from North America, from South America. 52 million people is a lot of people. So I think to the degree that we welcome those visitors and try to provide a great experience for them when they're here, and show them some of the things that there are to look at. In terms of specific things, I think there are various topics that we've worked on. I think actually some of the resiliency projects that we're working on now, which have to do with protecting some of the areas in New York, I think to the degree that we're working with many cultures, many different architects and designers and scientists from all over the world, there seems to be a greater sense of sort of global cooperation on those types of projects. So that's very exciting. I think that's really can facilitate sort of peaceful relations with countries when you're working with them on projects that are important to the city life. It's a really great question. I think some of us in New York are asking the same thing. I think there's certainly a stated different priorities with this new mayor. The housing plan, which just recently was issued on May 1st, outlines a really ambitious social program, but there's also hidden within that, we think, quite a lot of opportunity for planning and for incorporating some of this, the interests that New Yorkers have kind of come to really expect in terms of public space. And I think that I don't see how those issues and places and work won't be continued because there's so much demand for it. So far the current administration doesn't really have the language or hasn't been talking much about those issues as part of their program. But we are certainly, in my current organization, we are working with other interested design and culture organizations to facilitate that. We're definitely going to be advocating for those things to continue. Thank you. And I think, Macon, you also mentioned projects in other boroughs besides Manhattan, and I think one of the good focuses, and I think one of the things that my organization is focusing on is I mean, you can never have too much of a good thing, but Manhattan is quite well funded and well positioned in terms of all of its public space and art and culture. And so bringing those ideas and parades and events and cultural institutions and art in public places to the Bronx, Queens, Staten Island, Brooklyn, is really important, and we're looking at all the ways that we can do that.